Okay, we'll start with this. Fight Hub posted this via their Twitter account, and it reads, "I beat that boy 10 rounds to 2. An angry Gary Russell Jr. reacts to his loss to Mark Magsayo as he feels he outboxed and outclassed Magsayo and should have won the fight." We touched on this in my weekend recap video. I don't buy into that bullshit.
I don't pity Gary Russell Jr.
Injury and all, both he and Leo Santa Cruz have caused this division to stagnate for as long as I can remember.
The silver lining is maybe Mark Magsayo will fight Leo Santa Cruz.
I told you guys ahead of this weekend's fight that in spite of Lee Wood versus Mick Conlon being for a secondary version of Leo Santa Cruz's featherweight title, his WBA featherweight title, and in spite of Leo having to face the winner of that fight, I don't see it happening. What I could see happening, should Leo make it past Carbajal on the undercard of Thurman versus Barrios, his people will likely petition for an exemption to the mandatory to unify with Mark Magsayo. I could see that happening.
Yeah, let Mark beat the fuck out of that guy.
Leo Santa Cruz sucks.
He fucking sucks.
Leo Santa Cruz hasn't boxed as a featherweight since February of 2019. They should have never allowed him to hold on to that version of the WBA title for this long.
He moved up to 130 pounds that same year and picked up the WBA title there.
He has been there ever since. So why the WBA allowed him to hold on to two separate versions of their title at two separate weights is beyond me, when all that did was hold up the division, hold up the weight class.
He got knocked out by Gervonta Davis in October of 2020.
Gervonta won that WBA title from Leo Santa Cruz, subsequently vacated it. Now that title is in possession of Roger Gutierrez. Chris Colbert's going to be fighting him for it. I like Chris Colbert to win that fight. I like Chris Colbert to become that division's next WBA champion. Better still, Leo Santa Cruz and Gary Russell Jr. They've both been a bane to the featherweight division. Neither one of them has brought excitement to that weight class, and I'd like to see Mark Magsayo do to Leo Santa Cruz what he just did to Gary Russell Jr., perhaps worse.
Oh yeah, Leo's not as defensively sound as Gary.
Gary Russell Jr., whose reign as featherweight champion, WBC featherweight champion, came to an end last night. Billy Dibb chimed in.
Former IBF featherweight champion Billy Dibb.
He had some choice words for Gary. He did. He said, Gary Russell held the title, WBC title, for 6 years, but only made 6 defenses. Prince Nassim, who was also featherweight champion, made 15 title defenses in 5 years. 15! Worst thing in boxing is an inactive champion.
Gary Russell Jr. ain't no Prince Nassim Ahmed.
He never was. He never created the excitement, the buzz. He never electrified the fans the way that Prince Nassim Ahmed did. And Nassim Ahmed did it by getting out there, showing his shit, and
he did it by getting out there and fighting.
Unlike Gary Russell Jr., whose sparse schedule of activity didn't lend itself at all to his marquee value or the health and wealth of the featherweight division. Leo Santa Cruz and his very selective matchmaking.
I haven't been excited by a Leo Santa Cruz fight since the Carl Frampton rematch.
Seems they cashed him out, fed him to Gervonta Davis in an effort to help raise Gervonta Davis's profile, help raise his marquee value. And we knew that fight was in the making for some time in the build-up of it, leading up to it.
Now Leo's on the rebound.
He might be staying in the featherweight division at least long enough that we could see a Leo Santa Cruz versus Mark Magsayo unification match. I think we'd see that before we see...
I think he might end up fighting Mark before he ends up fighting the winner of Conlon versus Wood.
And the PBC might preemptively have already put in a petition for that, or they might put in a petition for that unification match, an exemption to the mandatory immediately after Leo Santa Cruz's next fight, provided he wins his next fight. And the WBA might give them leeway because, hey, they let Ugas off the hook for the Stanionis fight, right?
Right.
They didn't stick to their guns. Not that time. They gave Ugas the leeway he needed to go forward with that unification match against Errol Spence Jr. We might see something very similar in the featherweight division. They might let Leo off the hook and let him go unify with Mark.
You know that the highlights for last night's fight here on YouTube have already hit 1.3 million views?
1.3 million views in less than 24 hours. The Filipino fight fans have spoken. They have a new champion, and they seem to be behind him. Those kinds of units, those kinds of metrics, the following that Mark Magsayo could have. The PBC have got to know, if they play their cards right, they might have a...
If they feed Leo Santa Cruz to Mark Magsayo and Mark wins.
Just imagine the reaction. Just imagine the following that Mark Magsayo could have as the featherweight division's first unified champion in a long while.
Leo is nowhere as defensively sound as Gary Russell Jr. is.
He's easier to find in that squared circle in that ring, easier to hit. In the aesthetic of a Mark Magsayo versus Leo Santa Cruz fight, a Leo Santa Cruz unification match is fireworks because they are both action guys, more or less.
Look at the kind of stuff they've been putting on pay-per-view.
Ruiz versus Areola, Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz. More recently, we're going to see Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios. There's no quality control over there. Thus, the idea that this could end up happening and it could end up being a pay-per-view is entirely possible.
What I think is going to happen.
In other news, Shakur Stevenson, ahead of what is to be his Oscar Valdez super featherweight unification match, stated, "Sorry to say it again, but after April 30th, pound for pound, please." And this news is relatively new. Recent news that these two guys are finally going to meet up and lock horns. And I don't think a lot of people have had time to process this, that Shakur Stevenson is actually making a very valid point regardless of who wins the fight. You see, the winner of the fight will be a unified champion the same way that Artur Beterbiev is a unified champion, the same way that MJ Akhmadaliev, Stefan Fulton, the same way that the winner of Spence versus Ugas will be a unified champion, with the difference being that the winner of this fight, unlike the winner of those fights, not only will the winner of this fight be a two-division champion that has unseated two champions, two active reigning champions, and won belts from them, but the winner of this fight, regardless of who it is, will also be a two-division champion. That's right. Oscar Valdez.
Both Oscar Valdez and Shakur Stevenson are two-division champions.
Both of them. Oscar Valdez beat one active reigning world champion in Miguel Burchelt. Shakur Stevenson beat one active reigning world champion in Jamel Herring. That's the same number of world champions that MJ Akhmadaliev and Artur Beterbiev have beaten.
Whoever wins that fight, that makes two.
Whoever wins Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson will have beaten more active reigning world champions and taken their world titles than either MJ Akhmadaliev or Artur Beterbiev, giving them a more credible argument to be ranked on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list than either MJ Akhmadaliev or Artur Beterbiev.
Something similar applies to Stefan Fulton.
Now, Stefan Fulton had a big 2021. He started off the year by beating unbeaten Angelo Leo, took his WBO title, and he capped off the year by beating unbeaten Brendan Figueroa. He took his WBC title, effectively becoming a unified super bantamweight champion.
But he's not a two-division champion.
Which puts the winner of Stevenson versus Valdez just ahead of him in the queue, because the winner of that fight will have beaten two active reigning world champions the same as him, but the winner of that fight, regardless of who it is, has been a champion in more weight classes than Stefan Fulton.
Think about the winner of Spence versus Ugas.
And it really does depend on who wins. It really depends on who it is. If Yordenis Ugas beats Errol Spence Jr., that will literally be the only active reigning world champion he won belts from, I should say, because Spence is a unified champion. And that in and of itself, coupled with the condition of Errol Spence Jr., the fact that he hasn't fought in a year, he's coming off of an injury, it doesn't give Ugas that strong an argument. Now, if the shoe's on the other foot, if it happens the other way and Errol beats Ugas, well, that's a trickier situation, because that will be the third active reigning world champion that Errol Spence Jr. will have unseated and defeated. At this time, Errol Spence Jr. is not ranked on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. I know that there are some other periodicals out there.
Oh, I know that Ring Magazine and ESPN rate him, but I don't.
They've got their way of going about things, and I've got mine. Errol Spence Jr. just doesn't fit the bill right now. He doesn't meet the necessary criteria. There's not that much that separates him from a Stefan Fulton or an MJ Akhmadaliev or an Artur Beterbiev. There really isn't. His claim to fame is beating a battered Brook
When he was coming right off that loss to Gennady Golovkin.
and winning the green belt, winning the WBC title from Sean Porter, who was previously beaten by Kell Brook. Errol Spence Jr.'s resume is nowhere near as robust as people make it out to be, though if he can win another belt, if he can beat another champion, he might just make the list.
Not Ugas, though. He just doesn't have a strong enough argument.
If he pulls the upset and actually beats Errol Spence Jr., make no mistake, that's a big win for him. It's a personal best, but in the greater scheme of things, all that would mean is that Ugas' two biggest wins were guys who were coming off of lengthy stints of inactivity. Manny Pacquiao was out 2 years before he fought Yordenis Ugas, and Manny wasn't champion anymore. By that time, Ugas was elevated to full champion. Manny was the challenger, the inactive challenger. You think about Errol Spence Jr., he's coming off an injury and inactivity. Is beating those two guys under those...
You beat two inactive fighters, and that makes you pound for pound.
Well, maybe on your lists, but not mine. As it stands, Errol Spence Jr. would be the only active reigning world champion that Ugas will have won a belt from, and that is simply not a strong enough argument to get him ahead in the queue, ahead of a Stephen Fulton, ahead of a Shakur Stevenson or an Oscar Valdez, depending on which one wins. My money's on Stevenson.
There's set to be a slot opening up very soon on the Ring IQ pound for pound list.
Because two guys ranked within it are set to be locking horns very soon this year. Naoya Inoue and Nonito Donaire, they're both ranked on the Ring IQ pound for pound list for their respective bodies of work. There's set to be a rematch between them very soon in the land of the rising sun, and the loser of that fight will be bumped off the list, creating a vacancy.
Maybe the winner of Valdez versus Stevenson occupies that spot.
Maybe it'll be Errol Spence Jr. if he can get past Yordenis Ugas and unify that third world title. It really depends. Style points might have to come into it, as both winners would have very credible arguments. We'll see how it all breaks down, but these are very exciting times, and it's going to be interesting seeing how it is this cookie crumbles, the pound for pound cookie. In other news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Juan Estrada versus Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez 3 reportedly looks set to be postponed for March 5th, as Estrada has not been able to train at 100% after experiencing discomfort from what they suspect may be due to COVID. I'm sure you guys have come across this bit of information right now, and I don't like the sound of it. I don't like the sound of it because the Estrada people aren't saying that Juan has once again contracted COVID and he cannot complete his camp. What they're essentially saying is they don't like how the camp's going, they don't like how he looks. They think it might be related to COVID, but
You don't like how your camp is going, so you want to call off the fight.
the third installment of Estrada versus Gonzalez, in my humble opinion, is long overdue. This should have happened last year, and it didn't. And, here we are in 2022, and what the Estrada people are essentially saying, in so many words, is, we don't like how Juan is looking, we suspect.
We believe.
And this affects a lot of people. It's an inconvenience to everybody. It's an inconvenience to the people over there at Matchroom that are attempting to orchestrate this third fight. It's certainly an inconvenience to Chocolatito. Neither Chocolatito or Juan Francisco Estrada have seen any action since they met last year.
Hasn't this rematch been delayed enough?
Can you really say that this is a viable reason to delay it? Yet again, that the Estrada people don't like how the camp is going. I mean, short of a medical diagnosis.
Can he do that?
Delay it again, pull out of the fight because he doesn't like how his camp is going.
I just told you, it's not the same thing as saying I couldn't complete my camp because I fell ill.
That's just your fucking problem. Let me tell you something. I ain't got no hair on my tongue when it comes to the scoring in that fight. I didn't have Juan Francisco Estrada winning that thing, and I think he got enough consideration back then. I don't think he needs more consideration now. If he wants to delay this thing, he needs to go see a doctor, get a medical diagnosis to have precedence in order to do so, because right now, it's sounding like he's got cold feet is what it sounds like.
Give the guy a physical.
Take the guy to a doctor, take him to a hospital, rule out whatever it is you think needs ruling out, but what you can't do is say, well, I don't like how my camp is going, so I want to call off the fight.
I want to postpone it.
Something about that just doesn't sit right with me, and it's because you need justifiable cause in order to delay this thing any further. You can't say, I don't like how my guy's looking, so I don't want to put him in there with Chocolatito. That's just plain old cold feet is what that is.
See, their last fight was a war.
Close to a year ago, that's right. It's been close to a year since Juan had a fight. Maybe the reason he's not performing up to scratch is because that fight took something out of him, and let's be honest, I don't think he deserved to get the W. I don't think he won that fight.
So maybe that's why he's not looking too good in camp.
I'm just giving it to you straight. It's the only way I know how to give it to you. And short of a medical diagnosis that shows there's some physical ailment that is impeding Juan Francisco Estrada from fighting, impeding his ability to perform, he's no precedence to delay this fight. And finally, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Amir Khan versus Kell Brock on February 19th has a rematch clause Brook has revealed. And the viability of a rematch, the viability of a second fight between these two guys is contingent upon the aesthetic of the first fight and its commercial success. Because if commercially it's unsuccessful,
There's no fucking point in doing it again.
the silver lining, as it were, saving grace, the light at the end of the tunnel, is that I heard the tickets for this thing, I heard they sold out fast. I heard they sold out in about, 20 minutes? You think about that, and you think about how this might perform on pay-per-view, a Sky Sports box office pay-per-view. Sky's a very big platform. Everybody's familiar with it over there in the United Kingdom. And it's like I always told you, when the fight was first tabbed,
right,
when the fight was first announced, you got a lot of people moaning and groaning that this fight is several years too late.
But that doesn't mean they're not going to watch it.
They're going to watch it. I saw all the belly aching. I saw all the harsh criticisms until the fight was made official, and the tickets sold out in about 20 minutes. 20 fucking minutes. So believe me when I tell you, the first fight might be commercially successful, and the only thing that could impede the success of a potential second fight is the aesthetic of the first fight. It's got to be entertaining. These boys can't go in there looking like they're over the hill. They've got to go in there, muster up whatever strength they've got left to stop the man opposite the ring.
Amir Khan said he thinks Brook's punch resistance is gone.
Thinks that guy's got a glass chin, and that's rich coming from him, but when you think about it, he might be onto something. He might be right. You know, a couple of years ago, I would have picked Kell Brook to win this thing, but I happen to agree with Amir Khan. I don't think Kell Brook is anywhere as near as solid, takes as great a punch as he used to.
So what happens when you got two guys in the same ring that both got glass jaws?
Might all boil down to speed. Who's got the faster hands? Who can get off and who can get off first? Because whoever can get off first can land first and hurt the other guy. I do think Kell Brook's punch resistance has waned over the years. I don't think he takes as great a punch as he used to.
And the fight's going to be fought at a catchweight, so that can't be helping his situation.
More ideal weight for Kell Brook would have been 154 pounds. I'll go as far as saying 160 pounds for years. Kell Brook drained himself to make the welterweight limit, and I think it's taken something out of him. It has. I don't think he takes a great punch these days. Amir Khan, he's never taken a great punch, so he's not in unfamiliar territory. Brook is.
So think about that while you're laughing at Amir Khan saying he's got a glass jaw.
This is a grudge match, and these guys have got to fight like it in order to sell a second fight.